Sieg nun wieder Franz Beckenbauer in der strahlenden Pose des Gewinners.
Leeds United fans still chant "We are the champions, champions of Europe" because of that night in Paris 50 years ago now. But it wasn't Don Revie who managed them in that final, it was Jimmy Armfield, the forgotten man of Elland Road. Brian Clough was gone. The Don Revie succession plan was not only dead in the water, but it had been a complete overkill which threatened the very future of what the great man had built over the prior 13 years. In the midst of the rubble, it was Maurice Linley, Sid Owen and Billy Bremner who were tasked with selecting the team in the interim. And if that wasn't funny enough, the club offered Johnny Giles the job a full 2 months after they had rejected Don Revie's nomination for his loyal former player to take the job. Much like in Clough's time, the board was split 3-2, with the majority accepting of Giles. It was the slimness of this majority though that was enough to spook the player, who still played at Elland Road, and he didn't take the job on. After being pied off by the midfielder, the board got a bit of a flap on then as to who would be the long-term successor to Revie. The madcap rush took them to Burden Park and Bolton Wanderers, where a young and inexperienced coach was building something quite impressive. Jimmy Armfield had been in charge of the Trotters, yeah, that is a daft nickname, since 1971, and in his second full season he had steered them to promotion out of the 3rd Division. He was a young coach in the making a name for himself in the lower divisions, earning promotion. And would that be an omen for a potential new Don Revie or a potential new Brian Clough? Armfield was greatly respected in the business, playing over 600 times for Blackpool and being part of the wider England squad who in 1966, as you might well know, won the World Cup. There had been a chasm of 3 weeks between Clough's sacking and Armfield's appointment. Clough had been taking charge of 7 competitive fixtures and another 6 had been allowed to elapse before another permanent manager took charge. The run had confirmed another 3 matches would be piled onto what was already a hectic looking fixture list. In the negative column, Huddersfield Town held Leeds again in the League Cup, forcing a second replay in the second round. In the positive column there was Leeds United's return to the European Cup. FC Zurich, the first round opponents for the Yorkshire club. They turned up to Elland Road and had their bellies tickled 4-0 in what was the interim manager's first triumph. Then in their last act was a trip to Switzerland of consolidation, when more European football was confirmed for the October. In the meantime, Leeds had managed just 1 victory in league competition, thrashing Sheffield United 5-1, while trips to Turf Moor and Goodison Park either side of that represented yet more damaging defeats. As it happened, Armfield would be thrown in at the deep end, handed a match day for his very first day in charge of the club. Arguably, it was the club's most difficult fixture first, with the visit of Arsenal. And of all people, it was a Brian Clough signing who won the match. Duncan McKenzie with both goals in a 2-0 victory that had Armfield remarking, "If you can beat Arsenal, you can beat anyone." Anyone, starting with Huddersfield Town in the overly long League Cup second round. Armfield's momentum continued in the following round as Bury was sunk. The new manager had 2 key things in his cliched in tray. First up, get Eddie Gray out of them reserves and rehabilitate the winger after the incessant Cloughian barbs. The second, to sharply raise the morale of the group. Leeds had gone from a father figure in Don Revie to a brutal arsonist in Brian Clough. Armfield on that scale was more of a kind uncle. He was a nice guy in a team that supposedly was full of thugs. Some found him too nice, some found him to be the perfect tonic. His first great masterpiece wasn't on the field, however, it was laying on a stage adaptation of Cinderella, and no, I'm not taking the piss. According to Daniel Chapman's essential book, 100 Years of Leeds United, Duncan McKenzie played the lead, Paul Rainey was cast as Prince Charming, and Gordon McQueen, the Good Fairy. Amidst all that nonsense, the club's form wouldn't pick up immediately. They claimed just 1 win from the next 5, which factored in a surprise elimination from the League Cup in the 4th round against Chester. The rain needed just 1 flicker of life to get things going, and that was found in the European Cup, and that was found with a visit of Hungarians Uzpres Doza in the second round of the continental competition.
Giles. McQueen. Yes! Unmarked! Unmarked! Yes! Got a victory!
With the Hungarians slain 5-1 on aggregate in a surprisingly comfortable pair of contests, Leeds could now put Europe to one side and settle in for the long haul winter under a new manager. The return to form began with an early November trip to Highfield Road and continued through the league challenges of Middlesbrough and Carlisle United before the visit of an old rival at the end of the month.
On the right foot. Lorimer. Good goal. Monroe, here's Gray. Oh yes, she scored.
Now Leeds were cooking. Even when the FA Cup showed up on Elland Road's doorstep, the club could no longer be distracted. In the third round, Cardiff was slapped by 4-1. Then in league competition, opponents from the capital fell. First West Ham at Elland Road before old foes Chelsea were vanquished at Stamford Bridge. And whilst Coventry and Derby stole a point apiece from Armfield's side, Leeds looked defensively solid once again, securing the points in a pair of 0-0 draws. That in fact was the scoreline when Wimbledon visited Elland Road for the fourth round of the FA Cup. It wouldn't be long, however, before the replay proved Leeds were still quite capable of defeating teams from the capital.
Clark here, Mackenzie between the two. Giles. Oh, he's going to defend.
He's still going well, that's good. Oh, it's an own goal, a terrible own goal!
And with that fifth round triumph over title contenders Derby County at the baseball ground, Leeds were officially competing on three fronts. Across 3 days in early March, Leeds would welcome the return of the European Cup in the shape of a Stern-Anderlecht quarter-final. Also in the quarter-finals of competition back home, a trip to Bobby Robson's Ipswich Town in the FA Cup. And nobody was calling these Leeds players tired and old now.
Defenders, Eddie Gray, Lorimer. The far side to Billy Bremner. And here is Bremner with a chance for Leeds. It's a cheeky little chip.
Anderlecht in the quarter-final was no mean feat and comfortably the hardest task Leeds had yet in the European Cup, and it had been pretty routine when all was said and done. The club were now staring down the barrel of 3 months undefeated in all competitions. With Anderlecht sworn off, Leeds sat in 9th place in the league, holding on to just 37 points, having lost 10 of 33 matches. Under any normal circumstances, a title race would have been downright laughable. And yet, they had a game in hand over Everton, who themselves had won just 14 games, just like Leeds, and were only 6 points ahead. In such a weak field, Leeds could potentially be on for a treble. With 2 weeks to go until Barcelona's visit to Elland Road, Leeds United could have quite easily racked up quite the tab at a Leicester hotel had they gone home for much longer, playing every 2 days against the same opposition to find out the fourth and final FA Cup semi-finalists. In the end, it was a mercy that Ipswich finally had the guts to finish off what had become an absurd spectacle, one of the all-time longest FA Cup ties. In that environment, it's no wonder that a tired Leeds slacked off in the league, going winless in 7 in approach to their Catalan treat in the European Cup. Newcastle, Leicester and Sheffield United each took a point off Leeds, whilst Liverpool supplied the requisite test at Elland Road 4 days before Barcelona's visit. That understandable run of form killed 2 of Leeds' opportunities at a trophy. They now only remained the European Cup. In the squad for Norman Hunter was Paul Madeley, his job man mark Johan Cruyff. It was to be his finest hour.
Jordan, good flick to Bremner. 1-0. Asensi is there as well. Asensi. 1 each. Jordan. Yoreth.
2-1 the scoreline thanks to the late Alan Clark, winner, a victory on the night but far from a triumph. The Camp Nou was next, Barcelona had an away goal and were strong favourites to join either Bayern Munich or Saint Etienne in Paris.
Now this could be the moment for Lorimer, yes! Peter Lorimer! Oh, with the free kick, curling in there once again. Flores, yes!
Despite Gordon McQueen hooking a Barcelona player and being sent off, Leeds had heroically held out for the 1-1 draw. Leeds United were into the European Cup final for the very first time. By now, league form had gone out of the window, although there were 2 pretty handy wins over some strong opposition, both by 2-1 winning scorelines between the Barcelona legs. First, Arsenal fell at Highbury, and then 1978 Cup final conquerors Ipswich Town went down by the same scoreline at Elland Road. And whilst the final 2 matches were effectively throwaways against Wolves and Spurs, nobody really cared anymore. Leeds United were off to Paris for their first ever European Cup final.
Torstensen. Und Tor! Tor! Und 2-0! 2-0!
So the question is, do Leeds have any right to feel aggrieved? Well, there was the penalty that ought to have been given for Franz Beckenbauer's handball midway through the first half. There was the other penalty that should have been ruled against Beckenbauer moments later when he tripped Alan Clark in the box. And then there's Peter Lorimer's goal that was initially ruled correctly by the French referee, only for him to be overruled by the linesman. After all that, fans rioted in the stands and they felt completely cheated. Meanwhile, on the pitch, Bayern were forensically able to pick apart their emotional opponents with 2 goals in the final 19 minutes. There, of course, is the other side of the coin that saw Bjorn Andersen carted off with a broken leg inside of 3 minutes by Terry Yorif, which might have warranted a red card but was by no means as blatant as the 3 decisions that went against the English side. How would the club pick themselves up after this defeat? The immediate aftermath was surrounded by the waving goodbye to club stalwarts none bigger than Johnny Giles. Giles, who moved to West Brom to become the Baggies player manager, saw his former club squeeze every last penny of profit out of his new club. Manny Cousins' excuse? They'd paid him good money over the years. Giles' retort was to grab the little bollock by the throat and call him a miserable little fucker. His words, not mine. Mick Jones was more forced out of the club, courtesy of his long injury problems culling his playing career. This left Joe Jordan his long-term replacement, and the frontman was part of the new wave sweeping over Elland Road that also saw Gordon McQueen, Terry Yorif and Frank Gray fast-tracked into becoming the club's new cornerstones. The aftermath of Paris continued throughout the summer as UEFA doled out a 4-year ban. Jimmy Armfield had to fight this almost entirely on his own without the help of the club. When he worked tirelessly to get the ban halved to 2 years, the boardroom did at least pay for his travel and expenses to and from Geneva. Let's find out if it mattered. Well, Leeds bombed out in the Cups early thanks to a 1-0 home defeat to Notts County in the League Cup and the same against Crystal Palace in the FA Cup. It left European qualification not possible anyway by backdooring via a cup victory. In the league, only the omniscient Liverpool and the notoriously tricky Stoke City of the Victoria Ground had Leeds' number in the first week. A resurgent Manchester United, bouncing back from the second division, claimed a 2-1 win at Elland Road, and the reigning champions Derby County under Dave Mackay were able to steal both points on the first day of November in a match more renowned for a good old scrap between Norman Hunter and Francis Lee. Other than that, Leeds were improving. Duncan McKenzie continued his goal-scoring form, netting 16 as Clough's other signings of Johns McGovern and O'Hare had long since followed him to Nottingham Forest. Their latest string of 7 league games, won from 8 either side of the new year, had Leeds United dreaming of the league title once again. In advance of their solemn cup elimination, Leeds clutched on to a game in hand behind Cross Pennines rivals Manchester United. With only a points deficit, Leeds United were back in the hunt. A point away to a good Wolves side wasn't terminal to Leeds' league ambitions, no, it was more so the one win from the next 8 in the first division, which kicked off with some pretty horrific performances and a grand total of 0 goals scored from 3 straight defeats against Norwich, Liverpool and Borough. At least they rallied to some kind of respectable finish, however. What could have been a disastrous slide down the division was culled somewhat by the triumphs over teams like Everton, Arsenal, Newcastle and Man City. Ultimately, however, with 3 losses from 4 to end the campaign, Leeds were slumped down into 5th, out of European contention even if they would have been allowed to compete. Consequently, the poor second half of the season makes 1975-76 more synonymous with champions Liverpool and their surprise title rivals in QPR and Man United. That summer there was more waving goodbye to be done to club legends. Billy Bremner finally departed for Hull City, whilst Norman Hunter was quickly out of the door too, leaving for Bristol City. Upon his arrival into the West Country, Hunter realised just how underpaid he and his fellow Leeds stars had been when he discovered his basic wage would have made him one of the lowest owners at the mighty Bristol City. A third exit was arguably more inexplicable. Duncan McKenzie was sold despite completing his most prolific Leeds season yet. Even more shocking, his destination, Anderlecht. He would be replaced by Ray Hankin to the tune of 170 grand acquired from Burnley. Meanwhile, pulses were set racing more so by Tony Curry, added to the ranks for 240 grand from Sheffield United. Where once the grits of Bremner and Hunter battled to control the game, Leeds were now governed by players of significantly more flair. Perhaps that could be attributed to their downturn in form. Yes, it took 2 months for Leeds to chalk up 2 victories. Yes, they were hit with embarrassments like shipping 4 at Coventry and going down to rabble like Middlesbrough and Bristol City. Yes, this was far removed from the era of Don Revie as Leeds finished 10th, the epitome of mid-table, with the same amount of wins as defeats, 15 points off the Liverpool pace, 8 points off relegation. But there was one shining light and it went by the name of the FA Cup. After another trip to Stoke City went awry in the first hurdle of the League Cup, Leeds were intent on making their mark on the 76-77 season one way or another. Traditionally, for a team with a potent mix of true capabilities but just as true fragilities, Leeds could only channel that via the medium of the FA Cup. So after 5 goals were slapped beyond Norwich and the likes of Birmingham, Man City and Wolves were each beaten by the odd goal, the venue of Hillsborough and the opponents known as Manchester United revealed themselves. The prize was a trip to Wembley and a potential first trophy of the Jimmy Armfield era. With that, the season was over. There was a certain quality to this Leeds United side, but recurring injuries to talent up front in Alan Clark and new boy Ray Hankin meant that names such as Curry, Cherry, McQueen and Jordan wasn't enough. So when Leeds opened up their chequebook again to bring Arthur Graham from Aberdeen, there was optimism once again. And when Hankins kept scoring and scoring and scoring, that was taken to a new level. After an opening day aberration at St James's Park, Leeds began the season brightly. But this Leeds team, ground down by the marathon of a 42-game league season, were found to be porous in concentrated pockets. From the triple defeats against Bristol City, Liverpool and Borough in October, or to West Brom, Newcastle and in cup elimination to Man City either side of the new year, they could go on a bit of a bad run of form quite quickly. And yet there was solace to be had from the League Cup. Rochdale were always going to be beaten in August before Armfield wouldn't fall victim to Colchester, famously like one of his predecessors. Then when Bolton and Everton fell in the 4th round and quarter-final respectively, Armfield had himself another crack at a semi-final and another shot at Wembley. And what did I say about pockets of bad form? In successive matches, Leeds were beaten by the newly promoted Nottingham Forest. Now, of course, we go on to learn that this was no ordinary newly promoted team. Forest were on their way to a league title and European Cups, but with another season over as early as late February, the salt was applied to the wound when it was a certain Brian Clough the one lifting those trophies, as well as the League Cup, I should add. An improvement of a place and 4 points was no longer enough for some. Joe Jordan and Gordon McQueen were in the primes of their careers and felt no longer obliged to carry an inconsistent mid-table First Division team. They both fled what was viewed to be a sinking ship. Joe Jordan unforgivably in 2 aspects: first, the timing of leaving the club in January, weeks out from a cup semi-final, and secondly, in his destination. But then again, Gordon McQueen repeated the trick, joining Joe Jordan at that very same club in the summer. They were now Manchester United players at a monetary value of £800,000. McQueen couldn't help but deliver one final gut punch, stating, 99% of players want to play for Manchester United and the other 1% are liars. The Armfield transition was always teetering on a knife edge right from the very first knock-ins of his tenure. This double sale just about bowled him over. Factor in key departures to big names and big reputations, combined with Don Howe moving on from his position as assistant manager, it left a gaping hole in the professionalism of the club. Armfield tried to fill it by spunking $300,000 on Paul Hart, Gordon McQueen's defensive replacement from Blackpool, before adding John Hawley of Hull City. But his time had long since run out as the manager found out about his imminent sacking from the Sunday People, as opposed to the people running the club itself. It was a brutal end to what had been a brutal few years for Leeds United, where the margin between success and failure was wafer thin. From the controversial night in Paris to the pair of semi-finals back home, for happier times, here's a Leeds origin story as told through Don Revie.